Just a second here, I'm not quite ready. I had a few notes here and I wanted to have them close by. I have a little outline. So I always spend a few minutes before these calls kind of thinking through how I want to present it. So we're going to talk about reactive stories, and I want to give some context and kind of work up to it, giving you some other theory about triggers and that sort of thing. And then I'll probably take us through an exercise where we'll get to look at something in our own life and see how we can read the story to see what the core need is underneath that, the core unmet need. And then what do we do with that once we find an unmet need? But first I want to talk about Einstein's famous quote. A lot of you have heard this, and it's attributed to Einstein. I think that's accurate. He said that essentially what he said was the basic question for a human to ask oneself in order to kind of determine what determines the course of your life is the question, is the universe friendly? Now, I don't know if you've all heard that. You probably have. I don't know if you've contemplated your own orientation around that, but take a moment and just how that lands for you. Is the universe friendly? And in my world, what I've discovered is some of us have very unfortunate experiences that hurt us, and actual examples of mistreatment by adults in our early life. And so to us, we realize that things like that, things like humans mistreating one another, humans not being trustworthy, we realize that that can happen. Others of us grow up without those kind of experiences. We have mainly supportive experiences with maybe a few disappointments and hurts along the way, but we've never had that experience of the universe really being unfriendly to us. And so we don't have that same idea. I'm not saying ideas can't change over the course of a lifetime. I think they can. But I mean, that's what my work is all about, healing those wounds so you can be free of your conditioning and see the world fresh and new in each moment. I mean, that's the whole body of work that I'm dedicated to, is getting back into the present moment and realizing the past is the past, but we can't just ignore the past. So the reason I say that thing about some of us realize that mistreatment can happen and others of us are kind of blissfully unaware, perhaps some of us at least, I kind of want us to start with the idea that we have different life experiences. Each one of us has a different background that we bring to any given moment. And we might think, oh, that person is so negative, because you're a person you're one of those blissfully unaware people, let's say. And so when we judge other people, we're judging them from our own past experience. And of course, we want to really step back from that and become good witnesses of these kind of conditioned beliefs, conditioned orientations to judge and that sort of thing. Because the path is really all about getting free of our conditioning, if we can. I mean, to the extent that we can in a lifetime. So now I want to move into that. Is the universe friendly is kind of like related to the attachment literature. Are you securely attached or insecurely attached? And most of us have some degree of insecure, fear-based beliefs, even if we weren't mistreated. It's because, for one thing, we all grew up in a world where we were small and everybody else around us was big. Not everybody, but most of the people were big and they knew how to do things and we didn't. And so I personally believe that there's a fear of not being enough. Like, I don't really know how to do it, that kind of thing. I think there's a little bit of just that little kid innocence, you know, help me out here, but kind of not always feeling safe to ask for help or guidance or input, that's kind of in there, that not good enough thing, just from being small. So just take a moment and see if that resonates for you. So back to secure and insecure attachment. I want to look now at core needs that every child has that create security. And if those needs are not met, this is the area where it's going to set you up for getting triggered later on in life. So I've got a screen share here. All children need protection from physical harm, from emotional harm. So just think about your own life here, because we're really just getting set up to understand the origins of our triggers here. Our triggers, what I mean by that, are reactions that come from the fear place inside of us, that fears that we're not loved, that we're not good enough, and has some kind of emotional reaction, which either might look like blowing up or shutting down or withdrawing. That's basically, blowing up is fight, shutting down is freeze, and withdrawing is flight. So, and there's other fold and fawn, and there's other F's that have been talked about, but most of those other F's have something to do with the freeze reaction, trying to override your freeze reaction. So I'm good with the 3 F's, fight, flight, freeze. So let's take a look at this, the rest of this list here. We need protection. You know what that is, basically. You felt safe. If you had protection, you felt there's somebody looking out for me. It's not like I'm all on my own here and the world is a totally dangerous place. So you're feeling like you're not alone. We all need loving attention. That's things like the adults, especially your caregivers, your parents, looking at you and saying things like, I love you, you're such a good kid. I'm so glad that you came into my life. No, genuine appreciation. How many of us ever got something like that? Whether it's verbal or nonverbal, that doesn't matter so much. But that you felt goodness and love coming from the outside into you. Now, when we think about these things, we might start getting sad or angry because some of us didn't have as much of that as we needed. So as we start getting sad or angry, let's acknowledge that as the part of you that wants to protect you right now, or the part of you that has compassion for you right now. So there's more to you than just the wounded child. If you start having these other reactions, they're coming from another place in you. We all need guidance and encouragement. That's things like being shown how to do things, shown how to tie your shoe. Somebody taught you how to swim, and they were relatively patient with that. How many of us had that? Let's just feel into that. You can maybe get along without guidance and encouragement and still be fairly securely attached, especially if you were a good observer as a little kid and you could kind of imitate others and figure things out. It's nice to have guidance and encouragement, but that's not quite as essential for your emotional security. And some of you might be parents here as you're looking down this list and you're thinking, oh my God, you know, how do my kids feel? So just be with that. And we all need co-regulation, which means if you get upset or scared, or you're just feeling down, you're able to go to someone else, or someone else picks up that you're feeling that, and they hold you and look into your eyes and use soothing voice tones to let you know this will pass. Co-regulation shows you that you can be agitated and upset and unhappy, and then somebody else's nervous system joins with your nervous system, you know, gets close with you. It requires physical closeness, co-regulation. And all of a sudden, your nervous system starts to calm down. Now, that's something parents can do for their children at any age, although at certain ages, children, or certain types of children too, are not open to that. I know many parents who just tell me things like, my kid doesn't let me hug them. So, you know, maybe hugging isn't always the right thing for your particular child, but we all needed some kind of being with. That's what co-regulation is. And that's what, if we didn't get it as children, I'm going to be encouraging us to give that to ourselves as adults. This is how we heal through the reparenting process. So we'll be getting into that. But I'm setting us up here to start feeling into what your actual life was like, to begin to have some feelings about that, but also to bring the witness in, and you're observing this, and you're observing what your particular story was. And when I say story in this case, I mean your actual life story. I mean, there's we use the word story and some people say, story's garbage. Well, your actual life story is not garbage. It's what really happened, to the extent that your memory is accurate. And it's a good thing to have clear memories, to know what happened, or to have clear memories of yesterday of what happened. That's a skill needed for a high functioning person. So that's your life story, your history. Now, of course, that's also where all your conditioning came from, but it doesn't mean it's garbage. It means it's something you have to come to terms with. If you were neglected or abused, we all are now, I think, at this stage in life, coming to terms with that, accepting that, yeah, that really did happen, and I have feelings about that. So that's your story, is part of you. The reactive story that we're going to be talking about is a different kind of story. That's the kind of story that's defensive, or makes up reasons why things are happening that are really just fabrications based on your worst fears. Or sometimes the fabrications are based on wishful thinking. So wishful thinking, fearful thinking, those are both things to understand about yourself. Notice when you're doing that kind of thing. So I'm going to stop the share now, and I'm just going to pause and see if anyone has questions at this point before I go on and look at reactive stories and triggers and our own personal stories. So any questions, just raise your hand, either in the program, that little yellow hand, or just your actual hand. And I think there's 2 pages here, so I'm going to go to the next page too, to just see if there are any questions. Okay. I don't see any. Does somebody else see any? I'll go on if there's no questions. I have another screen share. This will be all the things that tell you you're triggered. In my latest book, from trigger to tranquil, I have an exercise about knowing your trigger signature. So here's how you know your trigger signature. I'm going to share a screen. So when we're triggered, we'll have body sensations, which I don't have on this handout. But what I do have on this is we'll have reactive stories, we'll have reactive feelings and reactive behavior. So I'll start with just body sensations though. So we'll have some kind of tightness in the chest or feeling like you're punched in the gut or something like that. So if you think about a time when you were triggered, if you really get into it and recall it in depth, you'll be able to identify some kind of body sensation. And you'll be able to identify some kind of reactive story. And so that's what I want to look at here with you. And here are some of the reactive stories. And I want you to look at them there. Like under reactive stories, I have like the top set that starts out, I'm all alone here, it's all up to me. And then I have the set down, second paragraph starts out, nothing I do works. So the top set is generally associated with people who are the pursuers in relationship, who are anxiously attached. It's called preoccupied attached, anxious attached. That terminology is used for people who tend to move toward in a stressful situation. They want more contact. They don't want to be abandoned. They don't want to be left alone. And we can identify where that might have come from when we look back at, okay, were you protected? Did you feel loved? That kind of thing. So look down this list, and I want to actually, well, we're not, if I do a show of hands, I was going to do a show of hands, but we won't be able to see everybody anyway. So I guess we won't do a show of hands. But just let's ask yourself, which one of these, reading down here, I'm all alone, it's up to me, I'm shut out. I mean, this is, we're talking about in intimate relationships here, because this is where these trigger reactions show up the most. Or secondary place that they show up is either with your own child or with your adult parent. It's these, the people that trigger us are the people that we're kind of depending on in some way. I call them the obligatory relationships of life. The person at the post office is probably not going to trigger you to the depth that somebody that you're somewhat dependent on. So it could be your boss at work because you're dependent on that job for your survival. And anybody who's got noise in the background, please mute yourself. So just looking down here, an awful lot of people come in with, in my couples counseling practice, come in with things like, there's no room for my voice, my needs don't matter, that kind of a feeling. They don't say it necessarily in those exact words at first. A lot of times, the words that play in your head at first are blaming stories, like he's incapable of intimacy, or, you know, or she's overreactive. No, those kind of. But if you peel them back, if I say, you know, my partner's overreactive, I'm really saying down here, I need to calm things down. It's the last one in italics here. I need to calm things down. I can't take this. And the need underneath that is for some degree of calmness and equilibrium. This person's nervous system is easily overwhelmed. So if I'm blaming the other person for being too reactive or too verbal, perhaps if I read into that, so now I'm kind of teaching you how to read the need underneath the reactive story. So even if it starts out blaming, he's overreactive, what's really going on is, well, what's secondarily going on is the story. I need to calm things down. I need to keep things reasonable, that sort of thing. And underneath that is, my nervous system is very sensitive. I'm easily overwhelmed. Now, these first set of reactive stories in the top are the anxious attached. The lower set are the what's called the avoidant attached, or sometimes just called the avoidant. Now, this terminology doesn't cover every facet of what's going on in a person. This is just a model, but I'm using this model because so often opposites attract in relationships. And I don't necessarily mean at first. At first, you don't realize that there's some kind of polarity. My partner's very expressive, and I'm the kind of person that likes to keep things calm. At first, it just looks like, wow, look how joyful that person is. And later on, when you get into the power struggle stage, as I've called it, it's, man, you can't shut this person up, that type of thing. But even underneath that is where we get to the real childhood-based insecurities that generally come up with these opposites attract kind of marriages or partnering. I won't say opposites always attract. It's often for a certain phase in your growth that opposites attract, and you go through one or more of these kinds of relationships that I call healing relationships. Now, sometimes we need a few healing relationships before we're able to have a more peaceful relationship. Okay, I see Dex has a hand raised, and that's a good way to get my attention because it actually shows up on my screen, folks. Dex, what's your question or comment?
Help me understand how, I guess it's the bottom group that's the avoidant.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not getting it, how that's avoidant.
They're just called avoidant. That's just that's just the literature, attachment psychology. There's a whole body of work called attachment theory. It comes from early people who studied early childhood development, but now they've expanded it to look beyond early childhood needs, and they've seen how adults behave in ways that kind of belie the core needs, the ones that I talked about before, the needs for protection, the needs for loving attention. So these two different attachment styles, preoccupied versus avoidant, they reveal what kinds of needs were not met in your early childhood. So one of the things that I was suggesting here in the avoidant is, believe it or not, a lot of times we could say that the avoidant is more sensitive than the other kind. And people think it's the opposite. Oh, I mean, yes, I think we're all sensitive more than a lot of us think, especially those of us who tend to be more avoidant. I've tended to be more avoidant. Okay. What that means is I can be pretty calm in an argument. I can remember what was said, and I can listen, but deep inside, there's a kind of I got to get out of here. This person's not being reasonable. Starts out that way. What's wrong with them? I didn't do anything wrong. Dex, do you recognize yourself in any of these things that I'm saying about myself, for example?
Yeah.
So you and I probably, again, it's a spectrum too. And with different relationships, sometimes you can be one, sometimes another. And I have been on the other side, because of relationship dynamics. I mean, if you've had as many relationships as I've had, you've probably been in every point on the spectrum. But back to, you're not quite getting why that's avoidant. It's just a label, Dex. But what
Yeah, just it
they're
helps
avoiding,
me when the label actually
Yeah.
helps me understand the behaviors. And
yeah, the avoidant is it avoids conflict. It avoids being overwhelmed. That's what it's avoiding. That's why it's called avoidant. And because it moves away in an argument, energetically, the avoidant moves away and feels more safe when they're by themselves in an argument. You know, I got to get out of here. I'm overwhelmed, or this is not making any sense. It's making me crazy. You know, that's the avoidant. Whereas the preoccupied, it goes, don't, where are you going? You know, let's finish this right now. And
yeah,
so, you know, avoidant means moving away, withdrawing, and preoccupied means, you know, I'm focused on you. I'm focused on getting contact, reestablishing contact with you. Can you see that?
yeah,
Polar?
that helps. Moving away, understanding that helps.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so when we look at the sentences here that tend to be the reactive stories, if people slow down enough, see, most of us, when we're triggered, we don't slow down enough to analyze. So, you know, that's why I wrote about the trigger signature exercise, so that you can have some insight into what you typically do when you're triggered and what stories typically come up. So here, all the good I do is ignored. So that's another feature of the avoidant personality. A lot of times we're good at doing, and we want to be appreciated for that. And everybody wants to be appreciated. It's not the domain only of the avoidant type here, but it just shows up a lot of times as, hey, why can't we look on the good side? Why can't you tell me about what I do right for a change instead of telling me what I do wrong? Now, some of you may have been on one end of this one. Sometimes some of us here have been on a different end of that one, that conversation. So I'm trying to name some of these things to help you become a better observer of your own process. That's the goal of this little webinar here. So just note if any of these reactive stories feel familiar to you. And I'm going to scroll down now, because other parts of your trigger signature, and your trigger signature is really the early warning signs that tell you that you're starting to get activated, and you might want to pause and calm yourself and do some other self-soothing, which I'll get to in a little bit here. So we've mentioned when you're triggered, your signature consists of reactive body sensations, which I didn't list, those reactive stories that we just talked about, and then there's reactive feelings. And Jane raised a hand. So Jane, what's your question?
Hi, it's good to be here, Susan. It's been a long time. I've been in your group before. My question is, you know, you said that the way the avoidant would feel safer would be to be alone. So how does the other person feel safer? The one who is what you're calling
The preoccupied or anxious. They feel safer when they're in close proximity, when they're touching, when they're continuing to talk, even if
touch. Yeah.
Even if it's yelling, they'll feel safer yelling than if their partner, you know, walks out and gets in the car. That will not feel safe. So, I mean, but we're talking what makes them feel safe when they're triggered is
Right.
It's possible. I mean, if you can co-regulate, sincerely co-regulate your triggered partner, that's great. remember what co-regulation is? Eye contact, touch, soothing voice tones. You can calm a partner's nervous system down that way. So that's an option. But if you're in reaction and you're the avoidant, you're in no shape to do that if you're in reaction. And more often than not, if one person's triggered, the other person is going to be, let's just say, not necessarily obviously triggered, but they're going to feel like they're on thin ice. I mean, I'm still being calm and reasonable, but I'm like walking on eggshells. So in a sense, I'm triggered also, and I'm not in any real shape to do genuine co-regulation. If you are, great. Okay, so just look here at reactive feelings, which types of reactive feelings. Again, I've put the anxious, preoccupied attachment style first, and the anxious, overwhelmed, frozen, afraid, those kind of feelings are more the domain of the avoidant. And it doesn't mean that avoidants never feel angry or frustrated. It doesn't mean that. It just means when there's a co-triggering, the avoidant tends to be the one that gets overwhelmed and has to kind of get the heck out of there, even if they don't know it. Because some of us, like myself, have learned to talk over the top of my fears. And so know when you're doing that. Oh, I'm the reasonable one. I can listen. I can active listen. Still, if you're an avoidant and you want to train yourself to hold a bigger charge and be less overwhelmed, please active listen. Do it anyway. I mean, but don't delude yourself that you're not triggered. You're just using a practice. Active listening means repeating back what you've heard. You really can do that to train yourself. Like, these are not a life sentence, these reactive feelings. So then down here under reactive behaviors, I've kind of alluded to that already. The first type, the preoccupied type, will run after the partner, and the more avoidant type will try to calm things down, calm the waters, maybe try to reason with the other person and even try to be right. So just see, are there any of those that you can own? And if you say yes to, any of these feelings or behaviors, that's what you want to watch out for, so that you can go, oh, I'm starting to get triggered. I better stop talking, stop behaving, stop it all, pause, calm my nervous system so I can get out of that fight, flight, freeze, reptilian part of the brain. And once I'm calm, my attention is more available. I'm more in my prefrontal cortex again. My attention is available for a bigger world, so that I can empathize with the other person or cooperate or truly listen. So we can't do anything worthwhile when we're in fight, flight, freeze. We really ought to stop it as soon as we can, until we can get ourselves back, our full selves, our more resourced selves. And then we can work out the problem, repair the trigger, that sort of thing. So I'm stopping the share. Back to us. So now I'd like to ask us to recall a triggering event in your own life. Just see what comes up. Don't make it something that's like a trauma, but just something where you got upset. And I mean, there's all kinds of traumas. So the word trauma is like they say big T and little t. So go with the little t for now. Don't go with sexual abuse or physical abuse, things where your actual physical survival was at stake, that's going to be too, it's going to get you too far into a place that you might not know how to get out of. But I think most of us here can just remember some time when our partner just didn't get what we needed. So recall that. And I'm going to go back for a minute to the screen share of the reactive stories, because we're just working with the stories now. Just want to quickly review those. So just take a look at those and see if anything like that. That'll just prompt you. And then kind of hold on to what your story was. I mean, remember it, because we're going to do a discussion and a share now. And just pick one triggering incident. If you want to get the most out of this kind of work, I suggest that, like for homework, you pick several different triggering incidents and see if there was some consistency in the reactive story. So I'm going to stop the share, come back. And I would like to take a volunteer if you're ready, and we'll just dialogue for a little bit. Okay, Karen, I see your hand. So start wherever you want to start. Maybe start with let's start with the story. I think I don't want to hear the whole background right now. I think it would be helpful to people if they could see just how knowing your story can be very useful. So would you be able to do that with me, Karen? Start with the story?
Sure.
All right.
Sure. My story is that I don't get to matter as much as everybody else gets to matter.
Yeah. So right there already, I mean, those of us who are listening to Karen, we can feel what's that need underneath is pretty obvious. I need to matter. I need to feel that I matter. I mean, that's a core need. It's a lovely human need. It's a universal human need. So it starts out as a fear, like I don't get to matter. Remember, these stories, I like to hyphenate the term fear story sometimes, so you'll really remember this is based on a fear, not an actuality. Okay, because I don't get to matter. Oh boy, that sounds kind of final. But if you say, I'm afraid that I don't get to matter, it brings it kind of more down to where you're living, which is right when you're triggered and when you're in that state, you're in a fear state. So I'm not going to take you through the rest of the steps right yet. I want to take you through, okay, so you know your story and you know what that tender place is. What do you do with that? But I'm going to see if maybe there's another one too, and another one or two, so that we can kind of show people what we showed with you, Karen, is it's pretty easy to read what's the need underneath and to feel that kind of tender softness, which is something we can really deal with, that tender part of ourselves, that needy part of ourselves. We have to own that it's there. And this helps us, this work, and Karen, just by you expressing that, this is like the first step in knowing, okay, here's an area where I need some healing, some love, some reparenting, some self-compassion. Anybody else got a story? And we'll just use it as another example. It looks like Teresa. Hi, Teresa.
Hey, Susan. So my story is, I'm afraid that no one sees me no one's protecting me, taking care of me.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. So
No
there's,
one cares about what I need.
mhm.
All of that.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. So I want to honor the people who are sharing and have us really feel how we're impacted. Because I was really impacted, Teresa, just hearing your words. And do we let ourselves, now it's sort of a challenge to, the whole world, do we let ourselves be sensitively impacted when we hear words like, I'm afraid I'm not seen, not protected, not cared about? Do we, do we make that into a fight, or do we realize that that's a fear that first we have to really come to terms with and own that that is in me? No amount of telling other people how they ought to treat us is going to change that. Until, doesn't mean we can't tell and ask for things from others, but until we've really fully owned it and felt it. And so, as we feel with Teresa, and as you, Teresa, feel with yourself, it's like you're developing a bit of the witness for this part of you. Just starting to value identifying these things. That's sort of the first step in developing the witness is, oh, I see a list and I recognize myself on the list. Okay, so I've got a little bit of the observer going there. Then I say it out loud to a group of people. There's others observing me. I get a little more of the witness activated because, wow, I'm not just observing myself. I'm aware I'm being observed. And so that expands your frame. And then if I really pause, so now let's do that. Imagine that either Karen's story or Teresa's story is your story. As I sink into this, I want to breathe a little more fully because these feelings can be kind of intense, and we want to allow that. We want to expand our capacity for feeling, for experiencing life as it is. So we breathe because that expands your ability to hold a charge. So let's do some of that now with your own story or with what you just heard from either Karen or Teresa. This feeling, if I breathe more consciously and fully, I'm making space. I'm making space inside myself. And I'm pausing in. So I recommend people actually have pause agreements in their relationships so that at the first sign of one of these reactive behaviors, reactive stories, reactive feelings, first sign of that, that's your trigger signature. It's like, oh, that's an early warning sign. That means go inward, calm myself. But also if I'm in an interaction where there's some conflict, I ask for a pause, or we have an agreement that you can ask for a pause and we'll both stop talking. That's all described in my latest two books. The latest one is From Trigger to Tranquil. So it has to do with noticing and then pausing, breathing, feeling yourself open a bigger space for the feelings, let the feelings in. And now it's almost like there's a big you and a little you. I think if I suggest it enough, people are going to get it. It's not something we've learned how to do, is to have sort of both the witnessing presence and the tender little hurting part of ourselves, to have those both in the screen at the same time. But we can learn to do that. And in a sense, some of us are doing it right now. So here I am just being with, and this is a key term, being with what's showing up in my feeling body and in my sensations. Being with that painful story And you kind of, when you're being with, for me, it's sort of like, oh, honey, that's what comes from my nurturing parent side. It's like, oh, honey, I get it. I'm here. I'm with you. And that's what that hurting part needs. Or some of us, we never got that from another human, but we can give it to ourselves. So just feeling into how that feels as you be with your own reactive story and the need underneath that. Because the need is so obvious when you hear the story. I mean, even a blaming story, you have to make a translation. If it's a blaming story, like, you never listen. Well, that's easy to translate. It's, I feel not heard. No, it's not exactly a feeling, but it's a reaction. Whenever you say something like not heard or not loved, it's a reaction, but it's got a feeling tone to it. And that's what we're looking for. And then if my fear is that I'm not heard or my voice doesn't matter, then I can soften in to embracing that. Okay, and then what do we do? What do we do once we've had compassion for the self and we be with it for a while? Different things happen when you do that enough. One time is not going to probably be enough for most of us. And as I say, different things happen. If you make this a practice and you hang out with those kind of like two aspects of the self, you just be with and be curious. Sometimes you'll just feel like almost like the two parts come together in a kind of mysterious way that feels healing, and you don't have any earlier memories or that kind of thing. Other times when you are in the be with process and you're just feeling and sensing and staying open and curious, childhood memories will come up. And sometimes there will be an urge to either embrace this younger version of you in your mind's eye, or maybe say something reassuring or loving to this hurting part. Or maybe you'll just feel grief. This is part of what I meant when I said coming to terms with what actually happened to you. Grief is a kind of mature response on the way to some kind of integration that, okay, this really happened. I'm going to be dealing with this in some way for the rest of my life. It's like if you were born with one leg shorter than the other or something, you're just dealing with that for the rest of your life. But it doesn't have to have the same pull on me, pull backwards on me. I can, like, for myself, I have abandonment fears and fears of being alone. Even though I said I was basically avoidant type, I have more of the fears of the preoccupied type, but I behave like an avoidant. So, these things aren't like, we don't all go by the textbook. So let's not try to pick apart the model, but find where it's useful to you, because all models are just models. They don't really replicate your exact experience. So my early wound has to do with not being nursed, not being fed right at the breast. And so I can feel that hunger, that urge for to not be alone, and that fear. And if I can just like come to terms with, okay, and I have worked on this so much, that like if my partner does something that triggers that fear of abandonment, I can go into the, oh honey, and just be with. And I would say, even though there's a trigger there, there's no impulse to react. It's just the, oh honey, and it probably takes 5 seconds. I notice that I'm triggered. I do a little self compassion, like, oh, honey. And I do touch myself, maybe some of you can see me on the screen that I'm hugging myself kind of. And it takes very little time because I've been doing this work since my early 20s and I'm like in my early 80s now. So, I mean, I probably figured this out, more than 10 years ago, but still it's a lifetime of work. But I want to give you guys encouragement too. So then when you've done your inner work, so let's kind of bring ourselves back now. We've done some inner work. What do we do with other people? Can we get what we want from other people? And I do believe, and I've kind of found proof of this, I guess it's not a scientific experiment, from all the couples that I've worked with. I think I've seen quite a bit of evidence, let's call it, that when the person's done their inner self-soothing and their inner compassion and softening toward that part of the self, I become less reactive to the fear of emotional pain. I become actually more able to tolerate more intensity and more emotional pain and that sort of thing. That I call them the normal pains of adult relationship. I don't mean being a masochist and, taking abuse, but just the normal frustrations of not getting my emotional needs met. I become more able to handle that. And I'm not as insistent upon my needs have to be met. So that's one of the developments. But another development, when you still are kind of, in the insistent stage of all this, once you've been compassionate with yourself, you can go to a partner and you're going to be coming from a more spacious place when you ask for what you want. And you do need to say, I need some co-regulation. I need a hug. I need to feel, and the way I language it in my books is non-controlling language. So it's not, I need a hug is like, okay, because it's kind of vulnerable. But if, I need you to, never say that to me again, unless it's clear boundary and it's abusive. But, you might just be trying to dictate language that somebody else uses. That kind of need doesn't work so well as I need to feel my voice matters. I need to feel there's space for me in this relationship. That type of, I need to feel valued and loved, or I need your help to feel. I think that's even more intimate if you've got the relationship where that's appropriate. I need your help to feel loved. I need your help to feel that there is room for my needs. And you can speak those words in a more sincere way when you're out of the blaming. You can't do that if you're blaming. If there's any blaming, don't ask for what you need, because you're not in a good space to get it or to even be in a receiving place. Receiving is like this. So yes, after you've done all this inner work, then yes, go and talk to your beloved or whoever is there that you can receive from. Now I'd like to see if there are any comments or questions at this point. Jane, you still have your hand up. Yeah, or a different hand, a new hand.
Yes. I find it's kind of a dichotomy how powerful it is to be there for myself when I'm having a reaction. And I'm wondering, in spite of that discovery, why is it so common to disbelieve in my power first? Why is that the default, that I believe that I have no power when I have a reaction?
Good, great question. Well, the conditioning from childhood is so strong. That's what we're up against. we've had these fear beliefs lurking for probably at least 20 or 30 years before we started working on them at all. So they've just been collecting evidence that the fear is true for all these years. You know what I mean? It's a major uphill task to do enough inner work to kind of make that stuff, to put that stuff in perspective. I like to just give you the words, that's my conditioning, you know, and I use this gesture, that's my conditioning. That's from then. And I'm in grief about my conditioning. That's now. And you just have to do this practice over and over again until it gets easier. Like it really has gotten easier for me. But I don't know, what does it take? 20, 30 years? 20, 30 relationships. No, I'm kidding. I didn't have that many, but okay, Dex.
Yeah, I am thinking about when my partner seems triggered and the importance of a pause agreement. Sometimes when she seems triggered, I might ask her, are you feeling triggered? And that seems to like trigger her more sometimes. So like how we can help one another identify when something's up and not blame one another for what's up.
Yeah, so I do not recommend saying to your partner, are you triggered? You could say, do you need a hug, honey? Or is there something you need? Or is there something that you want me to hear? You could say that, but then don't keep talking, you know? So if you're really in the space for that, or a pause agreement really means, even if I think my partner's triggered and I'm not triggered, I'm the one who's seeing it. So it's my job on behalf of the relationship to call for the pause. So a pause agreement generally means at the first sign that you're triggered, call for a pause. But I also define it as, or if you think your partner's triggered, because you're going to be somewhat affected. And the word pause is neutral. It doesn't carry much shame, if any, although we all have our levels of shame around the idea that, oh, that I would be triggered, and the idea that you would catch me being triggered. You know, that's kind of shameful for a lot of us because it's not in our vocabulary as much as it will be 10 to 20 years from now, you know, 10 to 20 years from now. Just like when I first became a therapist, nobody wanted anybody to know they were in therapy. You know, it was shameful. You know, this was the mid 60s when I became a therapist. And now everybody, oh, I got my shrink and I got my coach, and, you know, I mean, things will change, but right now your partner is not going to like hearing, are you triggered generally? Okay.
Yeah, and I'm thinking even calling for a pause, like if she's already heated, if I call for a pause, I can imagine her taking that as you're triggered.
Yeah.
And
Or oh, you're telling me to shut up? I mean, there's a lot of wrong ways this can go, you know, a lot of ways this can go bad. So
I guess maybe just me saying what I'm feeling. You know, I'm feeling anxious right now, and I'd like to just take a pause.
That'd be good. That'd be good if she's, you know, if she's tender there. But ultimately, you want to both get on the same page with what the pause agreement means, because it has a lot of layers to it. That one word is just a word, but, you know, read the book more carefully, read it together, discuss it, see if you both agree that pausing is a good thing. You have to really be on the same page before the actual pause agreement will work. But it's the most efficient thing that one can do if you're both on the same page. But if you're not, those little workarounds that you mentioned, like I'm feeling anxious, I think I need a pause to calm myself. I'll be back, reassure them. I'll be back in a minute. I just need a moment here. All of those workarounds, those are good, Dex. We are out of time. I know there might have been another question. If you got some leftover questions, put them in the chat. And send me and put your email in there, and I'll respond by email. But I'm kind of wanting to keep this to the 1 hour thing. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you so
Attention today.
much.
Yeah,
Susan.
thanks so much for showing up today. I really need people to show up to these so I can kind of continue to clarify my ideas.
Thank you so much. Yes,
I'm
thank you.
still learning, you guys, still trying to learn how to present this stuff because I think it's so important.
Well, you're so generous, Susan.
Thank
You're
you.
so generous. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Okay.
Here. Bye, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Susan. Great to see you.
Yeah, great.